All modal verbs can, could, may, might, should, ought to, must, will, shall, and would, plus have to and need to. Let's start with formulation. Remember that modal verbs are always followed by the infinitive without to, can do, may find, shall see, are the same for all the pronouns I should, it should, they should, take direct negative and question forms, we can't, can we, and never combine with another modal verb. She will may does not work. A note about have to and need to. Have to and need to are not modal verbs. They are ordinary verbs that are also always followed by the infinitive without to, have to do, need to be, but are not the same for all the pronouns. So I, you, we, they have or need to, but he, she, it has or needs to. They take auxiliaries. For example, I don't have to. Does she need to? And finally, they can combine with modal verbs. She will have to. We may need to. That's all for formulation of these verbs. Let's look at their usage, starting with can and can't. The first usage is ability or lack of ability in the present and future tenses. She cannot or she can't find her glasses. I can come back next week. The second usage is giving permission or expressing a prohibition. For example, you can't means you're not allowed to park in the staff car park, but you can, meaning you're allowed to, park in the visitors' car park. The third usage is informal requests. It's okay to use can with friends or close colleagues and family, but not in formal situations. So you can say to a family member, "Can you turn the music down, please?" Or, "Can we have fish for dinner, please?" The fourth usage is general possibility that's only with the positive verb can. For example, interest rate can go up or down. And the fifth usage is a negative deduction with can't. This is something that cannot be true. For example, she looks very young. She can't be 18 yet. Or, the grass is dry. It can't have rained last night. Okay, that's all for can. Let's move on to could and couldn't. Could is the past tense of can, so it is used for ability or lack of ability in the past. For example, she couldn't, could not, find her glasses last night. Or, I could go back the following week. I was able to go back the following week. The second usage, permission and prohibition in the past. For example, last night we couldn't or weren't allowed to park in the staff car park, but we were allowed to park in the visitors' car park. The third usage is to make a polite request. So in a more formal situation, could you spell your surname, please? Or, could we have a 10-minute break, please? The fourth usage of could, the affirmative verb, is making a suggestion. For example, in a dialogue, how do you suggest we contact him? We could call his office. And the fifth usage is a specific possibility, always with the positive verb, could. This is an alternative to may and might. So we could say, it could snow tomorrow, a possibility for the future. You can also say, it may or might snow tomorrow. A possibility in the past. She could have missed her train last night. You can also say, she may or might have missed her train last night. And finally, a negative deduction, something that cannot be true, with couldn't. She looks very young, she couldn't be 18 yet. Or, the grass is dry, it couldn't have rained last night. So note that for a negative deduction, can't and couldn't are interchangeable. So there is no difference between she can't be 18 yet and she couldn't be 18 yet. Or between it can't have rained last night and it couldn't have rained last night. Moving on to the next modal verb, may. The main usage of this modal verb is to ask for permission. For example, may we park in the staff car park? Or, may I borrow your car? Now, you can also use can and could to ask for permission, but may is the most polite modal verb to use. You can also use may to give or refuse permission, but you will sound more authoritative. Can is more friendly. Let's look at a couple of examples. So, you can say, may we or could we park in the staff car park? This is polite. The answer, no, you can't, but you can park in the visitors' car park. That's the friendly way to answer, using can and can't. Now let's look at an informal situation. Can I borrow your car, Mum? This is informal, son to mother. And the mother can answer, no, you may not, if she wants to be authoritative. Now let's look at the usage of may and might for possibility. As you saw earlier, it may or might snow tomorrow is a possibility for the future. And I don't know why her flight got cancelled. It might have been because of the snow, a possibility in the past. Do not use may if the situation is hypothetical. For example, if it hadn't snowed, her flight may not have got cancelled is not correct. In the third conditional, hypothetical situation, you must use might. If it hadn't snowed, her flight might not have got cancelled. A little note about contractions. There is no contracted form for may, so avoid saying mayn't. It's always may not. There is a contracted form for might, mightn't, but it's not very common. Okay, we can now move on to the next modal verb, should. The first usage is to express an opinion or to give advice or to ask for advice in the present and future situations. His birthday is coming up. I think we should send him a card. To my mind, we should all switch to solar energy. What do you think? Should I take up this offer? Right, the second usage of should is expressing an expectation. For example, the negotiations should end soon. I expect them to end soon. Or in the past, the negotiations should have ended by now. I expect them to have ended. The third usage of should is expressing your regret or criticizing someone about a past action. So it is in the past. should plus have done. I should have answered the phone. I regret not answering it. Or, you shouldn't have laughed at her. I am upset or angry that you laughed at her. I have a couple of notes here for you. The first one is about ought to. Ought to is a synonym for should. It sounds more formal than should and is less common, particularly in the question form. So let's look at the sentences we had with should and replace should by ought to. I think we ought to send him a card. Okay, but more formal. Ought I to take up this offer? Very rare. Keep it to should. The negotiations ought to end soon. Okay, and formal. You oughtn't to have laughed at her. Very formal. Next note is about should in conditional 1. You can use should in first conditional sentences for two things. The first one is to indicate a small possibility. For example, if I should visit Sydney again, I'll certainly contact you. The visit to Sydney is not very likely. And secondly, you can use should in informal English to replace if. So you can say, should you have any concerns, feel free to give me a call. Right, moving on to must. The first usage, expressing a necessity felt by the speaker to do or not to do something in present and future situations. For example, I'm beginning to get a headache. I must take a break now. Or, we mustn't assume that this information is correct. We must double-check it. To express a necessity felt by the speaker in the past, we need to use had to, because must does not have a past form. So, for example, I was beginning to get a headache. I had to take a break. The second usage of must is deducing or assuming that something is true, so we need it to be in a positive sentence. For example, she must be thrilled with these high marks on her tests. Or, no one is answering the door. They must have all left the house. Remember that to deduce that something is impossible or not true, we use can't or couldn't. So, for example, she can't or she couldn't be happy with these low marks on her tests. Or, I can hear noises in the kitchen. They can't or they couldn't have all left the house. Okay, now let's have a look at have to compared to must. Have to expresses an external obligation, and it can be used in all tenses in positive sentences. For example, she has to check that all the lights are out before she leaves the office. That's part of her duties. Or, I will have to finish this assignment tonight because it's due tomorrow. The teacher has asked for it for tomorrow. We had to queue for hours to buy tickets. They were obliged to buy tickets, and so they were obliged to queue. Now, we also use have to in the negative form to remove a necessity felt by the speaker or an external obligation. So, for example, I'm sure this information is accurate. We don't have to double-check it. Or, we didn't have to queue because we'd already bought our tickets. To summarize, the main difference between must and have to is that must is a necessity felt by the speaker, whereas have to is an external obligation or a rule. If this distinction is not important, you can use must and have to interchangeably in positive sentences. However, be careful that in the negative, must not is still a necessity or an obligation not to do something. It's a prohibition, whereas don't have to removes the necessity or obligation. I would also like to tell you a little something about need to. If the distinction between speaker's opinion and external obligation is unimportant, you can also use need to instead of both must and have to. So you can say, I'm tired, I must take a break. That's your opinion, your feeling. Or, I'm tired, I need to take a break. Or for an obligation, we didn't have to queue, we didn't need to queue. Another little note about need to. Sometimes you may see need used as a modal verb, but this is not common and can only be used in negative sentences and questions. So it's very common to say you didn't need to apologize, but you can also say you needn't have apologized. It's more formal. Or, do we need to start again? You can say, need we start again? Once again, it sounds a lot more formal. Moving on to will. The first usage, obviously, is the formulation of the future simple tense with all pronouns to do different things. For example, to express a possibility. Maybe I'll drop in and see you tomorrow. Or to predict a future event. I have a feeling he'll turn down my invitation. We also use will to volunteer or make an instant decision. You look exhausted. I'll let you rest. Or to make a promise. I won't tell anyone what you said. We can also use will in informal requests, for example with friends, with close colleagues and relatives, but avoid using it in formal situations. So you can say to a friend or a relative, will you put the rubbish out, please? Okay, the next modal verb to look at is shall. Shall is used in the formulation of the future simple tense with the pronouns I and we, and if you use shall, you will sound more formal. So it is less common than will. So let's look at our previous example with will and change it to shall. You look exhausted. I shall let you rest. Or, I shan't tell anyone what you said. Now, the main usages of shall are, first of all, offering to do something with the pronoun I in the question form. For example, you look exhausted. Shall I make you a cup of tea? Or, what shall I prepare for your dinner? You are offering to do something for someone else. And secondly, making a suggestion or asking for a suggestion with the pronoun we also in the question form. For example, it's too hot indoors. Shall we sit outside? Or, how shall we go about resolving this issue? You're asking for a suggestion for the group. And the final usage of shall is expressing a duty in formal documents and contracts. For example, the borrower shall pay the installments in arrears. That brings us to our last modal verb, which is would. The first usage is a habitual action in the past. It's similar to used to. For example, when she was a child, she would sit under a tree and draw for hours. It's like saying she used to sit under a tree and draw for hours. The second usage is an alternative to could you for making a polite request. So you can say, would you hold the line for a moment, please? It's the same as saying, could you hold the line for a moment, please? The third usage of would is in polite expressions. For example, I'd love to know more about your country. It's the same as saying, I want to know more about your country, but it's more polite, it's more formal. Or, I wouldn't like to interrupt your work. It simply means I don't want to interrupt your work, but it's more polite. And finally, the formulation of conditional 2 and conditional 3 sentences. For example, fortunately, she's away. If she were here, she would stop us. That's the second conditional. The third conditional. Fortunately, she was away last night. If she had been there, she would have stopped us. Right, that completes our review of all the modal verbs. It's time for exercises. I'd like you to use one of the following verbs or their negative form to complete the second sentence so that it expresses the same idea as in the first sentence. These are the verbs I'd like you to choose from: can, could, may, might, should, must, have to, will, shall, or would. For example, say that you were unable to get in touch with Roger. Lack of ability in the past: I couldn't get in touch with Roger. Okay, let's get started. Number 1. Say that I'm not allowed to use this laptop. Prohibition. You have two choices. You can't use this laptop, or you may not use this laptop. You can't use it is more friendly than you may not use it. Right, number 2. Politely request that I look up her number. A polite request, your choices are could or would. Could you look up her number, please? Or would you look up her number, please? Number 3. Deduce that it is true that they have taken over the business. A positive deduction, therefore your modal verb is must. They must have taken over the business. Number 4. Offer to drop me off at my office. An offer to do something for someone else. Shall I? Shall I drop you off at your office? Number 5. Say that it's not necessary that you go along with him. Removing a necessity in the present. I don't have to go along with him. Number 6. Ask for permission to sit next to me. Asking for permission, the best modal is may. May I sit next to you? Could I sit next to you works as well. It's still polite. And if you want to be informal, can I sit next to you? Okay. Number 7. Say that as a child, you had the habit of going riding every day. Habit in the past, similar to used to. As a child, I would go riding every day. Number 8. Volunteer to bake a cake. To volunteer, future simple tense, will or shall. I'll bake a cake or I shall bake a cake. Shall is more formal than will. Number 9. Say that it's possible that she has changed her mind. A possibility in the past, 3 potential modal verbs. She may have changed her mind, she might have changed her mind, or she could have changed her mind. Number 10. Ask for my advice whether to take up yoga. The modal verb for advice, should. Should I take up yoga? Number 11. Deduce that it is impossible that she has called the police. And negative deduction, your modal verbs are can't and couldn't. She can't have called the police, or she couldn't have called the police. Number 12. Say that it's necessary that you do not lose your temper. A necessity felt by the speaker. I mustn't lose my temper. Number 13. Say that it was an obligation to switch off your mobile phones. An obligation in the past. Had to. We had to switch off our mobile phones. Number 14. Suggest calling off the meeting. A suggestion for the group. Shall we call off the meeting? Or we could call off the meeting. And finally, 15. Politely state that you recommend a different course of action. The modal for politeness, would. I would recommend a different course of action.